Hi, I'm Tanya White. This week's Parsha is Parshat Tissa. And for me, when we think about the story of the golden calf, it's always signaled a deep truth about human nature. And that is that we are in fact human, that we fail, that we break. At times we're incapable of differentiating between holy and profane, but that there's always a way back. That fracture doesn't mean total destruction. And that ultimately, as Leonard Cohen surmises, there's a crack. And that's how the light gets in. What sometimes looks like a failure can in fact be a building block. In a book by Sheryl Sandberg, Option B, she catalogues the cataclysmic loss of her young husband. She uses stories of grief and adversity, and she brings in current research that talks about post-traumatic growth. That is that trauma doesn't need to be gotten over or gotten through, but it can be used as a springboard for human growth. That's not to say we invite trauma or loss or any of those adversarial things we face, but rather that once we've faced it, we can actually use it as a means of growth. This is quite similar to what David Kessler, who was a protege of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was the pioneer of the 5 stages of grief, David Kessler calls it the 6th stage of grief, and he defines that as creating meaning. Rav Soloveitchik, in his very well-known essay, Kol Dodi Dofek, Fate and Destiny, he calls it the existence of destiny, rather than fate. That's a mode in which I don't ask why, because asking why leads me to a sense of victimhood, but rather I ask, what does this call me to do? And that engenders a mode of agency. So let's just set the scene of this week's Parsha. The people are slaves, they've come out of Egypt, they've lost their leader, meaning Moshe has gone up to the mountain 40 days. They miscount according to the Midrash, and potentially they believe he's disappeared. But instead of sitting with the loss, and by the way, also not just the loss of Moshe, but also the loss of the immediacy of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence, they manage. Instead of sitting with that and managing it and managing the chasm that's been created, they seek to fill it and replace it. And by the way, many of us do this as well. We seek to cover over feelings that are not comfortable. And what they do is they find a replacement leader. And that replacement leader comes out through the Egel Hazav, through the golden calf. And eventually this kind of spirals into nihilistic behavior. But I want to ask a hard question. And it is really a question. What is the difference between the Egel and the Mishkan? Both are made from donations of the people. Both are crafted through talented workmanship. Both contain material images, the calf and the krovim, which are childlike figures that sit on the top of the ark, and both aim at some form of divine worship. So the biggest question is, why is one the quintessential expression of divine sanctity and worship, and the other the paradigmatic manifestation of idol worship? What is the difference between them? Let's just think for a second about the parshiot that we have been going through. We begin with Parsha Truma Tetzaveh, that describes the commands and the instructions to build the Mishkan. And then we have Ki Tissa in the middle, and then we have Yakel and Pekudei that describes the formation of it. But in the middle of Truma Tetzaveh and Yakel and Pekudei, we have Parshat Ki Tissa, which describes the instant of the golden calf. In other words, the heart of the Mishkan lies the golden calf. Any manifestation of divine worship that contains elements of creativity, innovation, human interpretation, subjectivity, holds the potential for idol worship. It's almost like they're two ends of a circle. The divine God is absolute, but our experience of him, our experience of divinity, our experience of transcendence is subjective. And therefore, in the gap between the two, always lies the possibility of egregious misrepresentation. At the heart of the human condition, what makes us human is our potential for unbridled freedom and human creativity, but that also contains within it the possibility of immense human destruction. Human freedom can be a force for good or bad. The question is how we use it, what motivates our actions, and to what degree we invest our creativity with transcendent value. The golden calf and the Mishkan ostensibly at first glance look the same, but on inspection we find that there is a chasm that separates them. And what is that? One is commanded and one isn't. One is used to bring divinity into the camp, and one is used to bring pagan worship to the fore. As human beings, our free choice sets us free. We always have the ability to choose, but not only how to act, but also how to frame our reality, how to interpret our given conditions. Is failure or loss or grief or pain or any of these things a place of severe, unmeasurable breakage that can't be redeemed? Or is it an opportunity to learn how to mourn, how to nurse loss, how to create a space for creative apperception, and eventually, perhaps to find meaning? I want to take those ideas and I want to look at two areas of our story. The greatest challenge we face as human beings is how we can find the light in the dark. How can we build resilience in the face of sometimes unbearable pain? And unfortunately today, as a nation, we're asking ourselves this question. In this parsha, it's actually Hashem who expresses these emotions. It's God. His beloved people have betrayed him only days after the greatest revelation ever to have been given to humankind. They build this golden calf, they bow down to it. And there's many, many reasons that people do it. But the result is that Hashem gets very angry. So much so that he actually offers to Moshe to make a new nation from him. Moshe comes down from the mountain. He smashes the luchot. He smashes this covenant between God and his people, which symbolizes this distance, this rift that's been created. But then something incredible happens. And that's the way that I see it is that Moshe teaches God a lesson that God himself had tried to teach Adam Harishon and Cain just a few generations earlier. He reminds God that he made a promise with the Avot that he has to keep to. He reminds him, and he says this to them, that they're an kashe oref, a people with a stiff neck who can't. What's an kashe oref? A people that have a stiff neck. It means a people that cannot move. When you have a stiff neck, you can't shift perspectives. You can't see. You can only see one perspective, only one way ahead. These people who are so used to idol worship and slavery are unable to make a shift in their thinking. And that's why Hashem says to them, Ra'iti et ha'am hazeh, v'hinei am ksha oref hu, va'ata hanicha li b'yachar api b'hem v'achlam. I've seen these people, they're stiff-necked. Now let my anger be against them so I can consume them. But it can also, the idea of the am kashe oref can also symbolize positive character trait. It can symbolize grit and determination, being set on your mission, face ahead, obstinance, stubbornness. Those character traits are what ultimately sustain us as a people and allow us to get through the many trials and tribulations we face. Somehow, through Moshe's argument, Hashem is persuaded and he does save them. What Moshe does here is he reminds God that human beings are not perfect. And though sometimes what might seem like a negative character trait can actually be the thing that ensures our survival. And in the end, he asks Hashem to forgive the people precisely because they're a stiff-necked people, meaning he takes God's reason for destroying them, turns it on his head, shifts the perspective, and uses that as a reason for God to save them. He says, "V'yomen imna matzati chem beinecha," if I found favor in your eyes, God, na adoni ki am kshe'orefu v'salachta lavoneinu v'chatanu v'chaltanu. He says to him, if I found favor in your eyes, na adoni b'karbenu, come into our midst, because ki am kshe'orefu, because it's a stiff-necked people, pardon their sin. And we could say because they're stiff-necked, so we don't have a choice, we have to just allow them to be. But I want to read it slightly differently. I want to say that it is because they're an am ksha oref. Because of that, Hashem allows the people to be forgiven and brings forward the 13 midot, the 13 attributes of rachamim, of divine grace, right? And that is the idea of teshuvah, the idea of forgiveness that is born out of the fragments, out of these fragments of the broken luchot, out of the cracks. There is a form of healing, a form of return, a form of redemption and rebuilding that happens. Sometimes through a non-ideal reality, something positive and beautiful and constructive can be born. Moshe teaches us Hashem to speak and how to live this life of option B. It's not ideal, but sometimes through the cracks, the light comes in, and beautifully Moshe comes down from the mountain and his face is a keren or a light. Perhaps when Moshe has taught God to see the good in people, God reflects back to him that light, that keren or, that light that emanates to so many people around. That's what positivity does. We all know people who are able to always see the good, and you want to be near them. You want to feel their rays of light. That's what Moshe was for God, and that's what God refracted back to Moshe. I don't think it's by chance that according to the Gemara in Menuchot, that the broken luchot sit next to the whole luchot in the Aron. It's a very strong reminder that to be human means that sometimes we break and we fail and our lives are not exactly ideal, but it's our strength is in our freedom, the freedom to escape the circumstances of our reality, to reframe our narrative, to move away from victimhood, gaining purpose and agency. When we are able to find the positive elements of failure and channel them towards growth, that is when we take the broken fragments and we create something whole. Something that is broken, sometimes when it's broken, that's how we really learn, where we really learn how important our relationships are and how strong they can be. Sometimes it's in the darkness that we learn to shine the light. Over the last 3 months, we've seen exactly this. We've witnessed the very best of our people as an Am Kshe Oref. We've seen our resilience, our strength, our stubbornness, our grit, our determination. We've experienced the darkest of times, but have seen our people shine in a way we have not done for a long time. We have davened like Moshe to Hashem and asked him to be compassionate and have rachamim. And we have seen so many like Moshe shining the light of Hashem into this world, refracted beautifully in the faces of so many others. May we continue to do this. Be'ezrat Hashem, wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom.